Welcome to lesson 5. Today we're going to be looking at if-else statements. So, first let's look at what are if statements. So, if statements execute code based on a condition being satisfied, and they use the if keyword. And if statements can also be used with booleans and conditional statements both. For example, in the example below, we are using an if statement with a boolean. So the x variable is assigned to true, and we are saying if x, so this basically means if x is true, then it prints the statement. And as you can see, since x is true, the statement is printed. What are else statements? So it's basically an extension of an if statement. It's the code to execute if the if statement's condition is not satisfied, and it uses the else keyword. So let's go back to the program we looked at in the last slide, and we can add an else statement down here which prints the variable x is false. So if it's not true, then it skips over this and goes to whatever code is indented in the else statement. And with loops and if-else statements, indentation is very important. So if this indentation is not here, it won't recognize this print code as part of the if statement, and you will get an error. Now let's look at elif statements, which are basically a way to add more conditions to the same if-else statement. And the way Python sees it is, if the previous conditions were not true, it'll try whatever is in the elif statement, and it uses the elif keyword. So let's look at this program below, where x is equal to 3, and the if statement says if x is greater than 5, it prints the variable x is greater than 5. And then we add an elif, which is the same execution as an if statement. So elif x is smaller than 5, and it shares the same syntax as well. Print the variable x is smaller than 5. And then it goes to the else, which if it's not greater or less than, then it must be equal to. So the else is basically a fallback. So if none of the previous conditions are satisfied, it will go to the else statement. Let's look at some more operators. So a short recap of the quotient operator we used in the last lesson. It divides whatever number by another number and rounds down. So in the example below, 10 divided by 4 comes to 2.5, and it rounds it down to 2. And 5 divided by 3 also comes in the 1 point something decimal values, and that rounds down as well. Now let's look at the remainder operator, which is denounced with the percentage symbol. And what it basically does is it divides one number by another and returns the remainder if there's any. If there's no remainder, it simply returns 0. So in this example, we have 10 divided by 3, whose remainder is 1, 30 divided by 4, whose remainder is 2, and 15 divided by 6, which is remainder is 3. So let's look more with using operators with if-else functions to determine whether a number is even or odd. When divided by 2, even numbers have a remainder of 0, and odd numbers will have a remainder of 1. So we can use the remainder operator for this, which we just learned returns the remainder of a number. So let's look at how to do this. Alright, let's start by asking a user input for the number. And then we can go into the if-else statement. So if the number, and we can use the remainder operator, if the number divided by 2's remainder is 0, then print the number is even. Or else, if it's not even, the number has to be odd. So else print the number is odd. And we can run this and see if it works. So let's run it twice. First we can put in an odd number. I'll do 5, and we get the number is odd. Next let's do 8, and we get the numbers even. Okay, next let's look at how to find which number is larger out of two numbers. So for this we can use some basic comparison operators, which is the greater than, less than, and equal to operators. Okay, we can start by getting two user inputs for the numbers, and we can call them A and B. Now that we have this, we can do a simple if-else operation using the greater than and less than operators. So if A is greater than B, then it prints the first number is larger, or if B is greater than A, then it prints the second number is larger. And if none of these, else that means that the two numbers are equal. So we can print the numbers are equal. Let's test this out. So let's do 5 and 3. So it says the first number is larger. Again, we can do, let's make number 2 larger this time. 3 and 7, the second number is larger. Now let's see if what happens when the number is equal. As expected, it outputs the numbers are equal. Next, let's see how to use an if-else function to determine if a triangle is equilateral or not. And we can ask for user input to determine the side lengths. Okay, so to get started, let's first define three variables, A, B, and C, for the three sides of the triangles, and take a user input for each of them. Alright, what we can do now is use an if-else statement. So if A is equal to B, and what we can do is just append another or add another equal to at the end of this and add C. So this basically means if A is equal to B is equal to C, that means if it's equilateral, we can print it is equilateral. And if not, we can print it is not. And let's test this. So let's make all the sides the same. 5, 5, 5, and it is equilateral. Or let's do them different. 5, 4, 3. It is not equilateral. Lastly, let's look at a more complex example, which is find the numbers between 1 and 100 that are divisible by 7. So for this, we'll need to use an if-else statement as well as a for loop. And we'll have to use the remainder operator to determine which numbers are divisible by 7. Okay, so to start, let's make a for loop with range 1 to 100. So 1, 101. And then inside that loop, we can do if I remainder 7 is equal to 0. So if it gets divided by 7 and the remainder is 0, then print I, so it'll print that number. And this is basically all we need, since in the else function we don't really need to print or do anything, so we can leave it as an if. And we can run this, and there we go, it prints all of the numbers divisible by 7, and if you look at this, it's also the multiples of 7, so 7, 14, 21, 28, 35. Alright, that is it for this lesson, and in the next two lessons we're going to be looking at functions, which are a really important part of Python and will help you in your code a lot.